Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I'm going to review and page through Call of Cthulhu, Regency Cthulhu from Chaosium Inc. Will this volume be crowned as a must-have by those looking for a mix of sensibility, and the mythos? Or will you find yourself about as happy with this book as the people of England were with King George IV? Well, you're going to find out right after this. Howdy, 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 gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. As I mentioned in the open, today I am going to review and page through Call of Cthulhu, Regency Cthulhu from Chaosium Inc. It's written by Andrew Peregrine, Lynn Hardy, and friends. Yes, another appearance by those mysterious friends. There's also a slew of contributing artists to this volume. This 224-page hardcover is available now, carries an MSRP of $44.99, which will include the PDF if you order from Chaosium, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $22.99. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Regency Cthulhu, Dark Designs in Jane Austen's England. A few things to mention before we dive on in. First off, fine folks over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important you know that. I'll also be picture-in-picture, so as we take a peek through, means I'll be cutting off a little bit of the upper left portion of the book. We're not going to look at each and every page, but I do want to give you a very good feel for what's in Regency Cthulhu, as well as share my thoughts about the book with you. Do want to also mention a good portion of the page count is devoted to a couple of adventures. So if you are an investigator hoping that your keeper is going to purchase Regency Cthulhu, you don't necessarily need to tune out just yet, but when I do reach the adventure portion, I would definitely recommend check out another video, hopefully here on the Gaming Gang channel, but you don't want any of the surprises for either of these two adventures ruined because you are watching this review. But if you are hoping that your keeper is going to pick this book up, let them know about this video so they can make an informed buying decision. So let's jump on in. Should mention, as usual, the production quality for this is really, really well done. It's what we've come to expect from Chaosium Inc. over the past few years. Paper stock, solid. I know there are some RPG books out there. The paper's a bit thicker. Of course, there are plenty out there where it's a lot thinner as well. I can see this holding up to repeated use at your gaming table. Artwork throughout, for the most part, very solid. There's a few pieces that are sort of ho-hum. But all in all, solid artwork. And of course, the cartography, top-notch. Excellent. Okay. So if you're not familiar with the Regency period, officially, technically, I guess I'll say, it's the period in England between 1811 and 1820, where King George III was still alive, he was still on the throne, but he was victim to serious mental illness. So Parliament felt that he was no longer capable of reigning and ruling England, so they named his son, also George, who was the Prince of Wales, as regent. So George ruled as a regent until his father passed in 1820. So it's considered the Regency period. Now, some folks look at the Regency period, I sort of do, as from about late 1780s, where you really began to see the mental illness take hold of the king, through about 1830, when George IV died. And William IV became king for about 7 years, and then Victoria became queen, and we know how long she reigned. So officially, it's 1811 to 1820, but there's a lot in this book that you could utilize for periods earlier than that and later than that as well. So we get a discussion of the Regency era. Also, we get some information about Jane Austen, too. We get information about her life, as well as kind of the focus of her novels. So Regency television shows, well, they've been popular for a long time, but they're very popular right now. And they focus on the upper class. Now, they don't necessarily focus on nobility, but they do focus on the upper class, normally referred to as the gentry. Now, you've got the gentry, you've got landed gentry, who, easily enough, they own land. And then we have the pseudo-gentry, which are people of sort of higher social station than you would, normally have with, say, like the working people of England, or the poor, obviously, of England. So the clergy, the military, physicians, they are all considered pseudo-gentry. But Regency era shows and novels tend to be focused on the gentry. They don't necessarily focus on the lower classes or the middle class. And your player characters are going to come from the gentry, or at least the vast majority of the player characters will come from some form of the gentry. Does that mean you have to? No. But it's kind of the focus of the shows and the novels for that period. So yeah, your investigators should. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you can't have investigators who are servants, right? Household servants, little upstairs, downstairs, kind of mix with that. So that's very, very possible as well. So we're going to get a good amount of information about the Regency era. And I really got to hand it to Chaosium Inc. and the authors, Andrew Peregrine, Lynn Hardy, and friends, because they respect the history of this era. And if you play Call of Cthulhu, if you run Call of Cthulhu, you tend to want your games to reflect history fairly well without, upsetting anybody at the game table. And I believe that this takes a very mature approach to how women were represented and what women during the Regency era, at least members of the gentry, would have to look forward to. They weren't allowed, really, to have occupations. They could have hobbies, but they couldn't really have occupations because women were looked down upon. So you also have some discussion about various cultures and how they're represented at that point in time. Now, does that mean you have to make your games of Regency Cthulhu absolutely, lockstep with the history? No, of course not. But there is a great respect for the real history in this book. And like I said, I really, really do appreciate that. So we get a handout for the player characters that kind of explains the Regency era. Something else that I'll mention about the Regency era, and I'm a bit of a history buff, you won't find the kind of stuffiness as you do in the Victorian era. People were far less buttoned down in England. Now, of course, there's still that caste system, but you had a bit more freewheeling going on with people and, their approach to life than you do see in the Victorian era, especially later in the Victorian era. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. I know folks out there might be surprised by that, but people were a bit more free and easy during the Regency era than they were in the Victorian era, which wouldn't necessarily jump, to mind. You would think, oh, more modern sensibilities. Not necessarily. Of course, this is also a point in time where the Industrial Revolution is beginning. Now, there is still a focus on rural areas. We haven't seen a vast migration to the cities or into industrial cities that are popping up. So you still have a majority of the English people working in the country. So we have information about new investigator occupations, new skills. There's a discussion on, female investigators and how they can approach different hobbies. So I don't want people to get the impression that you can't effectively play female investigators in Regency Cthulhu, because that is absolutely not the case. In fact, in many ways, female characters can get away with far more in this time period than they were going to be able to in a more modern era, simply because the men thought so little of women and their intelligence. Not all, but it was kind of they're given at that point in time that, men were far more intelligent than women, and women couldn't hold down a job because it would be too much for them. I know, insanity, but what can I tell you? That is the period. We also have an optional system for reputation, which is very cool. And it was created by Lynn Hardy. And I really do like it quite a lot. And you can gain reputation, you can lose reputation. Once again, this is a period of time where social standing is tremendously important, especially in this upper class. So I love that. One thing you will want to keep in mind is that it is possible to kind of get into a death spiral when you start losing reputation. So there can be kind of a domino effect. So as a keeper, you might want to use the reputation system, but don't use every reputation roll in the adventures, because it is super, super easy for your player characters to start out with a very high standing, have some poor die rolls, and suddenly they're pariahs. You don't necessarily want that. So as I had mentioned earlier, a great amount of the page space is devoted to a couple of adventures, and you're going to start off by learning about the town of Terryford. And I love this portion of the book. We get a breakdown of the town, important NPCs, a little bit of kind of like what's going on behind the scenes with the various NPCs and how they interconnect. We get artwork for each and every one, as well as we get stat blocks. So really, really dig this. Something else that I think is very important to note is these NPCs are fleshed out very, very well without having to go into 2 pages of detail about a single NPC. We have traits, role-playing hooks. So looking at any of these NPCs, reading through the paragraph or 2, sometimes a little bit more about each of these NPCs, I gotta be honest, I could easily role-play any of them. And I love that about this volume here, because that is not always a given with role-playing games, where you can get enough information about an NPC to really be able to role-play them at the table without having to read through 2-3 pages of background that will really never come into play. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of page space devoted to Terryford, which is where our 2 adventures are going to take place. I'm going to try to stay, once again, as spoiler-free as I possibly can regarding these adventures, but I do want to get into a little bit of detail about each of them. One thing, unfortunately, at least in my opinion, I feel the 2 adventures, they're separate, but they're kind of similar in certain respects. Both of them deal with some sort of like hidden entity that the town people are not aware of. Now, in the Long Corridor, which is the shorter of the 2 adventures, this is more along the lines of a secret place. But the way, at least from reading through these 2 adventures, the way they kind of feel is a little bit similar, and I would have liked to have seen them like radically different. Now, once again, they take place in the town of Terryford. This first adventure is going to have plenty of opportunities for the players, as well as the keeper, to involve themselves in kind of traditional Regency sort of activities. The things that you would see on Bridgerton or Poldark. Pretty sure Poldark takes place during the Regency era. Pretty sure, not positive. Or like the novels of Jane Austen, or even Charles Dickens. So we've got the big ball. We've got the coming out of the young woman who's an NPC. Now, there are also pre-generated characters for these adventures, which are actually also the NPCs if the players are not utilizing those player characters. So the first adventure deals with a portal to another dimension that opens every 100 years, and a family, years and years ago, centuries ago, actually, utilized this to find precious stones, precious gems in this mysterious other dimension, which unfortunately happens to be populated by these horrors, which are pretty cool. I definitely like them. I like their design. Their visual design is pretty cool. I definitely like that quite a lot. And every 100 years, this portal opens again, and something needs to be done regarding this family. A sacrifice has to be made in order to close this portal, hopefully before these horrors make their way through and start, devastating the town. So it just happens to be that in 1813, this portal's going to open up, and that family doesn't actually realize what they need to do anymore. So that's been lost. Well, not completely lost. The player characters will be able to find out about it, but this family isn't aware of it. So this portal needs to be closed. And this is a very interesting adventure, utilizes the period really, really well. My only problem with it is I don't like the solution. And I know damn well my players would not like the solution. Now, it is very Lovecraftian. I will point that out. But I can tell you right now, my players would not like the default conclusion to the Long Corridor, which is the title of the adventure. There are other options as well. You don't have to use the default solution. But I got to be honest, I would probably approach it a bit differently, even from the other options, because the other options didn't thrill me. It wouldn't upset my players, I'll tell you that much. But I would probably go in a bit of a different direction. So then the next adventure, The Emptiness Within, focuses on this trapped entity who is trying to, it has been trapped for a long, long time, and it's trying to make its presence felt outside of where it's trapped. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the adventure. And of course, it's another one of these situations where it's like, oops, we were digging where we shouldn't have been digging, and we've unleashed something. But one thing that I really do like about this adventure is that the player characters will actually have a nemesis, maybe more than one nemesis, that they have to deal with, as well as this entity. So very, very cool. I definitely like this adventure. And it takes place about a year after the Long Corridor. In fact, there are some threads that you can introduce in the Long Corridor that will eventually lead to The Emptiness Within. And the NPCs, once again, really well presented. This is a very, very solid adventure. Although, as I pointed out, both the adventures feel a little bit similar, and both adventures also include the possibility, the very real possibility, that horrors are going to be unleashed on the town of Terryford. So I think it's a little, once again, a little too similar. It's not terrible. It's not like, oh, forget it. I wouldn't run both of these. Sure, I certainly would. And you can easily run one into the other. And there are some rules about the downtime, the year or so, that actually will take place between the adventures. So there are some rules there for surviving player characters from the first adventure, being able to gain experience and get, skill increases and things like that. Something else that I think is very cool, once again, we've got these pre-gens, and the pre-gens are also available as NPC, important NPCs, actually, throughout the adventures. This is what I think is very cool. In the Appendix C, we get Terryford in 1913. So remember, that portal opens up, as I mentioned, from the Long Corridor. It opens up every 100 years. There's no way to stop it from opening every 100 years, at least not in the adventures. So that means it'll open again in 1913 and 2013. So I love the fact that we actually get a good number of pages devoted to Terryford in 1913. I thought that was very, very cool. Then, of course, we've got our handouts for the player characters. And we get some resources and inspiration. We've got new character sheets for the Regency era and an index, and that will wrap up Regency Cthulhu for Call of Cthulhu from Chaosium Inc. Let me swing on over to the other camera because I'm going to share some final thoughts as well as my review score. Before I jump into my review score, let me point out, at least in my opinion, there is tons of great information about the Regency era in Regency Cthulhu. Now, I will say, if you really want to bring this era to life at your game table, there are a couple of books that I would certainly recommend. One is available as an audiobook, and it's, strangely enough, not available as a physical book yet, even though it was published in 2020 off the top of my head. But first of all, there's What Jane Austen Ate and Charles Dickens' New, which is written by Daniel Poole. I had this book years and years ago, and it is a fantastic reference for the Regency period, including, recipes, what people ate. There's actually the rules to card games such as whist. So as an example, in the long corridor at that ball, there are people also playing cards. And I think it would be fantastic if you actually had your player characters play a few hands of whist. I think that would be awesome. So tons and tons of detail about kind of everyday life and everyday things during that period. Now, I have seen this softcover available used for about $5, and you can also get it new on Amazon for around $14. The other recommendation I would have is Ian Mortimer's Time Traveler's Guide to Regency England. Now, I have listened to this as an audiobook, really, really good. A little higher level information about the period. So you're not getting into detail about, how do you play whist, right? But it breaks down the different class structures, what nobility ranks above others, and really, really well done. And the narrator provides a solid performance as well. Because one aspect of audiobooks that sometimes turns me off is the person reading that book, some of them I just can't get into, and it could be the greatest book ever written, and they just get somebody who's just awful at reading it. It happens, but that is not the case. So what Jane Austen ate and Charles Dickens knew, as well as I think it's the Time Traveler's Guide to Regency England. So if you are interested in running this period, not even necessarily Call of Cthulhu, but in any role-playing game, both of those are fantastic references to utilize. I know the Time Traveler's Guide to Regency England is mentioned in Regency Cthulhu, but what Jane Austen ate and Charles Dickens knew is not. All right, so let's talk about the book itself. I really like it. I really like Regency Cthulhu a lot. And I know there were people out there when this was announced, and it was kind of came out of nowhere, at least as far as I know. It wasn't something that people were sitting there waiting for that's on the horizon. So like Cthulhu Gaslight or whatever they're going to call it. That a lot of people have been keeping their eyes open for. There's some hope that we're going to see that in 2023. We've got some teases about it. We didn't really see that for Regency Cthulhu. Regency Cthulhu, at least to me, kind of came out of the blue. But it's an excellent book. Now, I wouldn't say it's up there with, say, Berlin, the Wicked City, which is phenomenal. I mean, that's like a 10 out of 10, right? But it is really, really good. I've got minor quibbles. Sure, the two adventures are a little similar in certain ways. Okay, we've got that. Some of the artwork, there are some art pieces where it's kind of like, There are a couple of silhouettes that we see repeated a lot throughout the book. And to be honest, I would have rather not seen them repeated because all it kind of does is remind you of, I guess this is kind of filler. Is this like a placeholder for other art? But even with those little bitty quibbles, this is a fantastic book, especially for anyone who's interested in the Regency era and Call of Cthulhu. On a scale of 0 to 10, I give Call of Cthulhu, Regency Cthulhu from Chaosium Inc. a 9 out of 10. Highly, highly recommended. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. It'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central, right here on YouTube. Should point out this is one of my last videos for 2022, so I do want to wish all of you out there a very, very happy new year. Hopefully, you'll be visiting again next year. And of course, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.